Now, I want to continue to talk about what we have been seeing really these last 6 days. Hard to believe it's not even been a week since the CNN presidential debate there. And now so many questions from the media as well as his own Democratic Party asking, can Joe Biden make it to November and still be on the ballot there to take on Donald Trump there? Does he have the fight still in him? So many people want to know that one as well. But let's bring in political analyst here, Rich Rubino. Thanks so much for being with us today. And Rich,
Thank you.
I was telling you earlier, I was saying 6 days, that's all it's been. But it just seems like everything has shifted for President Biden.
Yeah, it's interesting. There have been bad debate performances before. Ronald Reagan's first debate with Walter Mondale, where it appeared lost. Barack Obama's our first debate with Mitt Romney, where Barack Obama probably lost. But there's never been anything quite like this. And I think part of it is, and part of the problem for Joe Biden is he was never really a base candidate for the Democratic Party. By that, I mean, he wasn't somebody like a Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama, for example. The base always was their first choice. He lost Iowa, he lost New Hampshire, and he lost Nevada. It was only South Carolina where he came back. So he's in a very kind of interesting position in that there are Democrats that are willing to abandon him and say that while they may vote for him, they would rather have somebody else. I don't know if that necessarily would be true with somebody who was more of a base candidate for the Democratic Party.
And Rich, I got to ask you, is there any coming back from this for Joe Biden, or can he weather the storm? Because I only ask you because of the growing now names from the Democratic Party that are kind of just really talking about his age now.
Right. And I think many members of the Democratic High Command are hoping that he bows out and they want somebody else because they believe that this is a winnable race, and it's probably a winnable race without Joe Biden on the ticket. That being said, if you look at the polls, he's still within striking distance of beating Donald Trump. Now he's down. The latest one I've seen, the CNN poll, shows him down by about shows Donald Trump winning. And the recent New York Times poll, which could very well be an outlier poll, shows Donald Trump winning by about 8 points. If you look at some of the swing states, Joe Biden is certainly within striking distance. But I think that if that was another Democrat, I think many in the Democratic Party believe without the age baggage that Democrat should be able to defeat Donald Trump in 2024.
And for really right now, for Joe Biden, it seems like it's a race within a race. Not only are you taking on Donald Trump, but it seems like you have to also convey the message to your own party that you're willing and able to continue on.
Yes, and that's where the whole base issue comes from, because he was never really the candidate of the Democratic base. He was more or less the nominee almost by default. I think many Democrats, particularly once it came down to South Carolina, were saying, who's somebody that we think can beat Donald Trump? And they said Joe Biden. Joe Biden's moderate enough. Joe Biden at least does not alienate blue-collar voters. They said, this is the person we want. And they kind of, some Democrats kind of held their nose and voted for him, but he was always kind of an establishment candidate. He also has the problem in that there are many, when he was in Washington, he was kind of somewhat, while he certainly had a lot of surface relationships, he went home to Delaware every day and took that train. He took the train back to Delaware every day. So as a result, he did not necessarily have those kind of close relationships in terms of Democrats that would say we absolutely positively need Joe Biden to continue to be president. And that's why so many of them are saying, they're saying you have a legacy. You might be remembered as the best one-term president since James K. Polk, but we want somebody else. And they also, I think, and you started this in the press conference, somebody asked the question, when he ran, he was running as a transitional figure, transitioning himself to another Democratic Party, to another Democratic candidate, rather. And I think that many Democrats are kind of surprised that he is running for re-election instead, thinking that he was just going to run and he was going to be transitional to somebody else and to younger members of the Democratic Party.
And what do you think, Rich? What would it take? Would it take someone like Representative Clyburn, or would it take someone like his wife to say, I think time is up, Joe?
Those are the two. The two you mentioned right now, I think, are the two. Certainly his wife is very close to him. Certainly Representative James Clyburn. Why is he relevant? Because after Joe Biden came in very poor showings in Iowa, New Hampshire, and in Nevada, if he did not win in South Carolina, he was probably going to have to drop out of the race. He did so poorly in New Hampshire that he literally left New Hampshire the day of the primary and went down to South Carolina and addressed his supporters from there. So he didn't even address his own supporters from New Hampshire because he knew how poorly he did. So accordingly, he went down to South Carolina, and James Clyburn, who at the time was the whip of the Democratic Party, very popular with the African American community in South Carolina, said, "This is our guy." It was probably the most important endorsement of any candidate since Jesse Helms endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1976 and helped him win in North Carolina, and eventually goes on to almost win the nomination that year. But Congressman Clyburn would be an extremely important, and he would probably say, and I think he has said, that he would support Vice President Harris if Joe Biden is not the nominee. I think those two you mentioned are probably the two most important, as well as his former chief of staff, Ron Klain, would be another one, maybe.
And we could talk about the debate performance all day, but I really want to continue to be fair to President Biden as well. And I want to ask you, do you think some of this, of course, not his fault at all? Do you think more than anything that even some of the Democrats or some people within his own family are to blame for putting the president out there like this when, look, no one knows Joe Biden better than his family, and they have to see things that, of course, we don't. Do you think ultimately maybe they're to blame for putting Joe Biden out like this and being front and center on this?
Well, if you take Joe Biden at his word, and he very well could, I think it might be that he is a lot different in private and a lot different in meetings. That's one thing you do hear from some people. You've heard even Kevin McCarthy, the former Speaker of the House, had said that essentially Joe Biden is very good in private and you kind of underestimate him. So I think the thought process with members of his family, member of his staff, member of his campaign staff, and members of the White House staff was that Joe Biden is essentially the same person in public as he was in private. You know, look, he had an abhorrent showing in that debate. He had an awful showing in that debate. But I still think that a lot of his advisors believe that he's a lot better in private, and they probably think that wait till September 10th, wait till he doesn't have his cold, that he's going to come and he's probably going to overwhelm or at least tie Donald Trump in the debate. And also, they've seen him in previous debates, going back to his days in the Senate. They've seen him as a very skillful orator. He was when you're chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and chairman of the Judiciary Committee, you're in a lot of positions where you're debating whether it's judicial nominees, someone, the Secretary of State, all those types of people. And he's been very effective. And I don't think they really saw that kind of trail off that the American people saw. And the American people just saw that in the last debate.
And I want to look forward to next week as well. The White House indicated that President Biden would be doing a news conference next week. How much pressure is on President Biden for that news conference when he hasn't had many in the past there? And now with everything that has happened at the debate, tell me about the pressure going into next week there for the president.
A lot of pressure, in part because he's not somebody like a Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush or Bill Clinton, who just had a litany of press conferences. Joe Biden has not had that many press conferences, and that's one of the arguments against him is that he's not willing to go in unscripted situations. He's great when he's with the teleprompter. You saw him in Raleigh, North Carolina, in front of that teleprompter and how good he is. This is something where he's actually going to have to be impromptu, and he's actually going to have to answer questions on the fly. It's almost as important as the actual debate as is the George Stephanopoulos interview, which he's going to do. Joe Biden has to show that he has the political dexterity beyond being in front of a teleprompter. He's very good. He could give a very good convention speech this summer as well, frankly, when in Chicago. But it's very important for him to show that he can be very good off the cuff, and that means sometimes taking adversarial type questions. So I think that it's extremely vital, it's critical, and it's very important.
And what about later this evening with the Democratic governors, a lot of them coming to the White House? Of course, that won't be on camera there, but we're expecting to hear about it from the governors. And how much pressure is on these Democratic governors when no doubt they'll be asked about how the meeting went? How was Joe Biden? How did he conduct the meeting? How much pressure is on them to convey, yep, everything is good with Joe?
That's what I think it's very interesting. If you're running for a reelection, very few candidates actually run for reelection during a presidential year. But you want yourself and you want down ballot candidates. You want them to be able to say that Joe Biden is somebody that's going to be a strategic asset, not a strategic liability, if you will, for your reelection, or at least neutral. It's interesting. A lot of these Democratic candidates are people who I think a lot of people are looking at. Could these person potentially supplant Joe Biden on the ticket? Whether it's Andy Beshear, whether it's Roy Cooper, whether it's Gretchen Whitmer, whether it's Gavin Newsom, Tim Walz, whoever it is. They're going to be asked the question, would you replace him? And they're immediately going to have to say something to the effect of, no, I'm very much with Joe Biden right now. That's such a remote possibility. But you're going to see potential presidential candidates if Joe Biden does not run in that room. Or for that matter, you're going to see potential vice presidential candidates with Vice President Harris if Joe Biden does not run, who are going to be talking on the teleconference with Joe Biden. But I think that you're going to hear them saying that they think he's very healthy, that they think he's doing a good job, or they'll try to talk about specific projects that are in their states and that are directly because of the infrastructure law that Joe Biden signed into law.
And lastly, Rich, you
Yeah.
know a lot about political history there, and I want to get your take. What are you thinking? Do you think Joe Biden can weather this storm and continue on for the race to be reelected? What do you think his chances are of getting out of this storm that has been created after this debate?
I'm ambivalent, but I do think this, though. I think that Americans, last time around, 94% of Republicans voted for Donald Trump, 94% of Democrats voted for Joe Biden. If you look at partisan allegiances versus where, in terms of which candidate the Republicans would support versus which candidate the Democrats would support, Joe Biden still has over 90% of Democrats. Donald Trump still has 90% of Republicans. And I think you could put any sort of a milquetoast Democrat versus a milquetoast Republican contemporaneously, and they're probably going to do about the same. What does that mean? That means this is going to be extremely close race. This will not be a landslide, no matter who the Democratic nominee is, no matter who the Republican nominee is. It could be any sort of standard issue Democrat, standard issue Republican, and they're probably going to do about the same.
Oh, there we go. All right, Rich Rubino, thanks so much for joining us on Live Now
Thank you.
from Fox. It has been definitely an interesting summer, and we'll continue to talk about it leading up to next week as well. Rich, thanks so much.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Mike.
You as well. Take care.